Should Ron Rivera have known how good Sam Howell could be last year in Sam's rookie year? I'll give you my answer to that question and more coming up next on Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday episode of Locked On Commanders, daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. And you can continue this conversation with me via text message by simply going to joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders. Get your first 2 weeks for free. If you like it, you stick around. If you don't, I appreciate you trying it out. Either way, I'm your host, David Harrison, on Twitter at DHarrison82, credential member of the media covering your Washington Commanders for CommanderCountry.com, part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And as always, greatly appreciate all the everydayers for coming through on a consistent basis, continuing to support the program the way that you do. On today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we're going to talk about several things. We're back out of practice for the first practice post roster cuts open to the media, practice squad players in attendance as well. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about some other issues going on around Commanderland today. But today's episode brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're going to start today's episode talking about something that actually came out yesterday on Tuesday as we're reacting to all the roster cuts and having the roster cut press conference with head coach Ron Rivera, general manager Martin Mayhew, talking to them about the decision process and how they came to some of the decisions they did with specific players in mind. But during the day, interview with Albert Breer, Sports Illustrated came out that involved Ron Rivera. Albert Breer's interview with Ron Rivera. During the interview, Coach Rivera revealed to Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated that he had a conversation following the Week 18 win over the Dallas Cowboys with his wife about how good Sam Howell performed in that game and about how he wished he had known that Sam was that good prior to that game. And he said, according to Breer of Sports Illustrated, again, quote, "You can ask Stephanie. All we effing talked about was the quarterback, what the quarterback did, who he was." And that, according to Breer, is what Rivera told him sitting on the couch in his office. Continuing, quote, "I kept saying, if I would have known this, I would have played him sooner. When you only have so much time to show it, it's hard. I kept thinking, God. But after that game, everything told me this kid, give him the opportunity and see what he does with it." End quote. So that quote right there sparked some controversy on social media, sparked some reactions by plenty of people, of course, and I'm sure that you've heard and seen a lot of reactions there about Coach Rivera kind of looking in hindsight. And he was asked by Matt Paras of Washington Times during the post-cut-down press conference about those comments and kind of about, learning about Sam Howell. And Coach Rivera acknowledged it was kind of a hindsight situation. Again, those comments are made after the Dallas Cowboys win, and the interview is obviously, not a full year, but a season later in real time, talking to Albert Breer there. Well, one of the more popular reactions to what Coach Rivera told Albert Breer in that SI article came from Pat McAfee, former NFL punter, host of his own very popular show, now works with ESPN. I believe he's one of the co-hosts now on ESPN Game Day. And Pat had a lot to say about Coach Rivera's words. And here's a little bit of a kind of a collection of the quotes that Pat McAfee had to say. Again, if you want to get the entire clip, you can find it on Twitter. You can find it in a lot of articles that have been written about it. So some of the things that Pat had to say, quote, "The more things that he says with his outside voice that should just be inside voice things makes me realize that maybe he's lost the certain thing that head coaches need to have." Quote, end quote. McAfee continued, quote, "For instance, not good to say, especially a guy that gets drafted to potentially be the future, to say, F, I had no idea this guy was good. Do you know what I would have done if we knew this guy could play football like this?" End quote. So I think the first part of this, so Pat McAfee kind of goes on this I don't want to call it rant, but right, he kind of goes on this long conversation, this long line of conversation about Coach Rivera having an inside voice and an outside voice and saying things that should be talked about with inside voice with his outside voice. And I don't want to put words in Pat McAfee's mouth, but the way that I'm understanding what he's talking about is that there are certain things that should stay inside the organization and certain things that should not, or certain things that you can tell to the public. And Coach Rivera's had plenty of comments in the past that people have taken a certain way with a certain grain of salt and under a certain light that some people think shouldn't be said. in the public. You go back to the comments just during training camp about Eric Bieniemy and him saying that some players early on in the process had some concerns. Obviously, those comments were kind of taken, and depending on the outlet, depending on the person hearing them, whether it's a media member, a fan, someone on social media, what have you, national media, people kind of take things a certain kind of way. Could Ron Rivera choose a little bit wiser what he says to reporters, what he says in the public light, and what he doesn't? Sure, he absolutely could. But I think something that media members and fans alike should appreciate about a coach is willing to conversate, right? And I've had the pleasure of covering a few different coaches. Washington, Ron Rivera is the only coach that I've covered, but in Tampa, I've covered a few different coaches, and I'll tell you that I've seen a little bit of a variety from coaches that really don't like to say anything, kind of like your Todd Bowles, to coaches that will say a lot, like Bruce Arians, and you can kind of trust a lot of what he says. And then coaches who say a lot without saying much, which is what we had with Dirk Cutter as the head coach there with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I would tell you personally, and again, I can't speak for everybody, right? But I would personally rather have a coach that is a little bit more transparent. And yes, there is the risk that he's going to say something that messes up, or say something that maybe people take and construed in a certain kind of way, whether it was intended to be that way or not. And honestly, Bruce Arians, like, there were several moments where Bruce Arians would say something to us, and once it got put out there in the public space, it was taken a certain kind of way, or was taken in a certain kind of light. Now, what I would say is Bruce Arians and his reputation and kind of just having the kind of the cool guy, doesn't care type of attitude kind of shielded him a little bit from some of the stuff. And granted, he's in Tampa, Florida. He's not in the nation's capital, right? So it's a little bit of a different environment as well. So that certainly plays into it. But I think personally, I would rather have a coach that I cover who is willing to speak, who's willing to say things, and just kind of have to understand kind of the context of where it's coming from. So that's just about the willingness for Coach Rivera to speak. But now let's get to the actual topic at hand and the evaluation of the quarterback, right? So McAfee continues, quote, "What we all liked about Sam Howell was how strong his arm was. I couldn't even imagine in practice what he was doing whenever he's just reading off cards going against the defense. I'm sure the defense is like, this guy has got effing hose over here." And Ron Rivera is like, "I don't want to see the film. I don't want to see the film. I don't want to see anything," end quote. And that's where I think Pat McAfee gets a little bit unfair here in the criticism of Coach Rivera. And again, just to be completely clear, during the season especially, media members only get to see a very short portion of practice. And what we get to see is the individual workout. Maybe we'll get to see the quarterback throw some routes and stuff like that, but you don't get to see the 11-on-11s, the 7-on-7s like you do during training camp. So from the end of preseason last year, all through the regular season, media members here didn't see anything really from Sam Howell because we weren't allowed to. Now, during practice, what was Sam Howell doing? Well, I can't tell you day to day what he was doing, but I can tell you for the most part, what he was doing is running the scout team. So what is the scout team? What the scout team is going to go out there to do is to give the defense certain looks. So let's say we're playing the Denver Broncos next week. The scout team is going to go out there, run specific plays that we think the Denver Broncos, or give specific looks that we think the Denver Broncos are going to give to the Washington Commanders defense. That allows the Washington Commanders defense to get a read on it, to get some influence on it, to get some exposure to it, and to get some practice running against some schemes and systems and route combinations that we think they might see in the upcoming game. That is what the scout offense does. So for at least a good portion of the practices, again, I can't tell you exactly what Sam did with every single snap, but for the good portion of the practices that he was running when he's getting reps, he's largely doing things that are scripted for him to give good looks to the defense. So it's not really about him trying to beat the defense in the traditional sense, or him going out there and showing that he can lead this team, lead the offense. Now, I will say that there have been some players. I was talking to another media member on the sideline today, and former Washington linebacker John Bostic came up, and John used to praise Sam Howell for some of the confidence he had on the practice field last year, and especially doing some things like running the read option and how smart he was in running the read option and do those kinds of things. So it's not that Sam didn't show anything positive, right? And certainly the arm strength. I mean, we were all kind of ranting and raving about the arm strength from the beginning of training camp. I think everybody could see that was evident, but it takes more than just a strong arm to be a good quarterback in the National Football League. So should Ron Rivera have seen what we saw in Week 18, what we're seeing now? I think to a certain extent, certainly you can say, yes, he probably could have or should have. But I think it's also important to remember the limited scope that you're actually seeing a backup, especially a third-string quarterback for a period of time, a backup quarterback for a period of time. It's not going through the lens that we got to see during training camp here this year for Sam Howell. So I just take that grain of salt with it. Again, not telling anybody how to believe or how to understand. I just want to apply that context to kind of understand what it is Sam is doing in practice last year from a physical standpoint. The other side of that that I would mention is we all have kind of talked about how Ron Rivera runs his ship, right? His offensive coordinator, his defensive coordinator, by and large, they run autonomously, right? He runs the entire thing. He's the commander of the organization, but he lets his coordinators run their units. So I would say, before we say why didn't Ron Rivera know that Sam Howell could be this, I would say, why didn't Scott Turner know? Why didn't Ken Zampese know that Sam Howell was going to be this good? I always kind of start there, because those are the guys, if you want the autonomy, which pretty much every coordinator in the NFL wants, I think, if you want that autonomy, you also have to take the responsibility of being able to deliver that information. So not taking the blame off of any one person, just saying this is a systematic deal. So it's more than one person that should be carrying, I think, a load of the blame here if we're going to drop blame on people. So that's my opinion on it. Take it for what that's worth. As always, listening and commenting and all that stuff doesn't require you agreeing with me. Coming up next, we're going to talk about practice. We're going to talk about some actual things happening this year, including the announcement of the practice squad and some injury updates from practice. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we'll do that thanks to our friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. So you want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. And that's why you need to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free and then add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you are hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks once again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or review today and every day. Every day is, once again, thank you for coming through on a consistent basis like you do. Subtexters, greatly appreciate you hanging out with me during practice, texting from the sideline while we're waiting to go in the locker room, and even a little bit from the locker room. Greatly appreciate your involvement. If you want to get involved on that, just head to join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. First 2 weeks are free. Figure it out if you like it. If you do, stick around. If you don't, I appreciate you giving it a shot. Anyway, Subtexters, I do have more information, more things I'm looking to share through that platform with you here in the very near future. So stick around. Very excited for some of the things that I'm trying to put together for you. Speaking of putting things together, the Washington Commanders obviously put together their initial 53-man roster this week, but they also had to put together their practice squad. In order for that to happen, you first had to get players through waivers, unclaimed, unsigned, all the like, and then bring them back and have them agree to terms with you to be a part of your practice squad. And we were able to see them on the practice field today, on Wednesday, again, for a short period of time. Because regular season mode is upon us. So media members, we have very little practice time. We get very little view of it. Really, a lot of it is roll call. And, guys like Logan Thomas, how well are they moving? Are they moving at all? Are they out there running? Stuff like that. So that's kind of stuff we're going to get specifically from practice. And then we talk to coach, talk to the players, try to get more from them as they're willing to share. But first, before we get to the injury stuff, let's talk about the practice squad. So the first name that stands out to me on the practice squad, quarterback Jake Fromm. As you know, every day's we go back to our roster projections. I did put him on my 53-man roster projection. Simply thought he did enough in the preseason, almost too much to allow him to get away. Not sure if he had any offers from anybody or if anybody really wanted him to come over, but bottom line, he goes unclaimed. So he ends up back with the Washington Commanders, and certainly happy to see him here in the facility on Wednesday. Wide receivers, two of them, Casimir Allen. We talked about him, the young punt return, kick return specialist who's obviously has some receiver ability. We talked about the drops in the preseason game, the muff punt in the preseason game, but we also talked about him coming back on the practice squad because the coaches, from the beginning of rookie minicamp, Ron Rivera was Kaz Allen was one of the first names that Ron Rivera talked about before the rookie minicamp, and that excitement and that anticipation of what his potential could be for this team has not gone away despite some of the flaws and the struggles that we saw during camp and in the preseason. So he's going to get to stick around. He'll be on the practice squad. He'll get some training, and we'll see what happens next year with his development. Wide receiver Bryson Tremaine, who caught a touchdown pass in that final preseason game. You remember Mitchell Tinsley, who made the active roster, got it all the way down to the 1 yard line, almost got into the end zone. Very next play, Jake Fromm hit Bryson Tremaine in the end zone for that touchdown. So two wide receivers on the practice squad, two running backs also on the practice squad. First and foremost, Alex Arma. And before you tell me he's a fullback or a tight end, the Commanders roster has him as a running back that they handed to us today. That's the reason I listed him here as a running back. Don't yell at me, yell at them. So Alex Arma, again, a guy that I put on my 53 over Curtis Hodges. He makes the practice squad, so he's back here as well to continue his development. And running back Derek Gore, a guy that Martin Mayhew mentioned to me during the press conference on Tuesday about Eric Bieniemy's participation in player evaluation and deciding who to bring in. He mentioned Derek Gore specifically as a guy who's come in off of the back of Eric Bieniemy's recommendations or what have you, and has made a significant difference during the training camp preseason period. So he's back on the practice squad as well. But it means no Jarrett Patterson on the Washington Commanders practice squad. 4 offensive linemen make it to the practice squad: Jared Jones-Smith, Alex Akinbulu, 2 offensive tackles, and then 2 interior offensive linemen: Mason Brooks, Nolan Laufenberg. Obviously, Mason Brooks was a kind of a favorite. I would call it a darling or a Cinderella of training camp for a period of time there. I think they still like what he has to bring to the field, and they certainly want to continue to develop that. And you look at Jared Jones-Smith, a little bit more of a football veteran. He's got a little bit of experience, but we'll see what he can continue to do here in the NFL with the Washington Commanders. And then Alex Akinbulu, Nolan Laufenberg, 2 guys that were with the team last year. Nolan Laufenberg specifically took a very large step today. Coach Juan Castillo told me earlier during training camp that he was looking really, really good, took a really good step forward. And we talked about them cross-training him a little bit at center during the tail end of training camp. I think if they continue to work on him with that this time next year, I think potentially Nolan Laufenberg is a serious contender to make the active 53-man roster. 2 defensive linemen, defensive end Will Bradley King continues to stick around with the team. Defensive tackle Benning Potoa'e going into his 2nd season with the Washington Commanders. This will be his first full season. He started last season with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Linebacker Scooter Harris makes the practice squad. 2 cornerbacks, Tariq Castro-Fields in his 2nd season out of Penn State, sticking around. Also Nick Whiteside II hanging around on the practice squad as well. And then safety Terrell Burgess also making the practice squad. So that's 15 names, but there's 16 spots on the practice squad. And the reason that is Jabril Cox reportedly headed to the Commanders practice squad, according to NFL Network's Mike Garafolo first, and then confirmed by several of the media members that you know and love out here on a daily basis. I think I saw Sam Fortier of Washington Post specifically tweet that he was able to later confirm Mike Garafolo's initial report. So who is Jabril Cox? Well, 4th-round pick of the Dallas Cowboys in 2021, active in both 21 and 2022 for the Cowboys, played 7 games in 2021 and had 2 total tackles. 9 games in 2022, had 6 total tackles. 87% of his snaps, 300-plus snaps in his career have come on special teams. So this has been a fringe roster guy his entire career. But Garafolo also reported that the Commanders had high evaluations on Cox entering the 2021 draft, but obviously they didn't end up coming up with him. Instead, he went 115th overall in the 4th round to the Dallas Cowboys. The Commanders ended up taking tight end John Bates at 124. Doesn't mean they would have taken Jabril Cox over John Bates necessarily, but that's just, that's the guy who kind of correlates with the area that Cox was originally drafted in. Back in 2021, Lance Zierlein wrote on Jabril Cox's draft profile, quote, "He'll need to be placed in a scheme where he can play proactive, attacking football rather than getting bogged down as a thinker. He's extremely fast with verified playmaking traits and credentials. His cover talent could help him quickly get on the field. He's below average in diagnosing and using his hands, which can put him in recovery mode at times. However, traits and talent should be enough to overcome those issues and help make him a solid 3-down starter within the first couple of seasons." Well, he's coming into his 3rd season. Obviously, he's not a 3-down starter, but the Washington Commanders certainly liked what they saw in him before, so they'll continue to try to develop him here on their practice squad. So let's wrap up our Commanders football practice news here on Wednesday with some observations on the injury front. No Terry McLaurin as he still works through that toe injury. Not really expecting to see him this week at all. Maybe next week. I wouldn't really. I don't know if I would get your hopes up about him playing week 1, to be quite honest with you, but more to follow on that. Chase Young participating in practice again, just in the portion we got to see, so I'm not sure what he was doing after we left. No pads today, so really, at the end of the day, even if you participate in the whole thing, there's not a lot of contact, but I'm still fairly confident you'll see Chase Young week 1. And Logan Thomas was again on the field in the early part of practice dealing with his calf injury. We spoke to him in the locker room after practice. He says he feels good. He feels ready to go, no limitations. He was asked specifically, I believe, by John Keim of ESPN, if this was the regular season the last couple of weeks, if he would have been held out the way that he has been. And he said, no, that's simply because it was preseason, abundance of caution, all that stuff. So it certainly sounds like Logan Thomas trending in the right direction for week 1 against the Arizona Cardinals, which the Arizona Cardinals cannot say, as Zach Ertz today on Wednesday said that he doesn't know if he'll be ready for week 1 himself. So the Washington Commanders could have their veteran tight end on the field while the Arizona Cardinals may be without their veteran tight end. And, they certainly need as many weapons as they can have over there. The Washington Commanders aren't going to be upset about that, but the Arizona Cardinals certainly want that. Something that a lot of other people want is a new name to the old name. We got an update on that on Wednesday shortly before practice. There's JP Finley of 106.7 The Fan. That's next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Howell, second the Locked On Commanders here, live from Ashburn, Virginia, at the Washington Commanders team facility in this nice, luxurious office. It's not as good as a scenery as we've had during training camp, but now it's regular season mode. We're back in the annex, and this is what the annex looks like. So, thanks for coming through as always. Everydayers coming through and supporting the channel, the episode, the show. We got some updates on the name change front. So there's been a lot of conversation about the name changing for the Washington Commanders again since the sale has gone through, since Josh Harris became the managing partner of the new ownership group. And specifically, there are quite a few people reportedly who want the name to go back to the old name that people so love and cherish. And Josh Harris is one of those people that loves and cherishes that name, as he said several times in press conferences and meetings and things since he's taken over as the managing partner of the team. But during an interview with JP Finley on 106.7 The Fan, team president Jason Wright said, quote, according to a tweet by JP Finley, Washington Commanders president Jason Wright said, quote, it's not being considered, period. The full tweet by JP said, quote, Commanders team president Jason Wright says that the team will not consider going back to the old team name. It is not being considered, period. So again, not being considered. Now, personally, I'm happy that Jason put this out there because I know it's been a big topic and a lot of people have asked about it. A lot of people have asked me about it specifically. Every day, as you already know, I've given you my opinion, whether or not Josh Harris loves the name, has affinity for the old name. Obviously, his childhood memories are attached to the old name. I think that on a personal level, somewhere maybe Josh Harris would love to bring back the old name. But when you talk about it from a business sense, which is what he's got to do as the managing partner of this team, it's not something that is wise for him to do. It's not something that I think the NFL will let him do anyway. The other NFL owners aren't going to let him do it. And you look at all the sponsors and all the business partnerships that are starting to trickle in very, very quickly, actually. So I say trickle, but really they're starting to flow. Those are going to dry up quickly if he tries to do this. And again, it doesn't matter if I agree with it or like it. It doesn't matter if we all agree with it or like it. That is just kind of the landscape that we're operating in and that Josh Harris is operating in. So that's not an opinion. That's just the way that the landscape looks. And, team president Jason Wright, all but, basically confirming he's not speaking for Josh, but you're pretty confident that Jason Wright is not going to say something like that unless he's got the go ahead to, and he knows that that's the case. Now, something that I think some fans and I think most Commanders fans, would appreciate. I mean, some of you are on the boat of it's the Commanders, like just move on. Let's just focus on winning football games. And I get that point of view as well, certainly. But I also get the point of view of the tide of history and all that stuff. But there's the other side of this. There's the other side of, could the team name change again down the road to a different name? And I will say that, things are said, but then at the same time, some things are not said. Jason Wright didn't say that the name's not going to change at all. He just said that the name is not going to change back. So if you're in that camp of wanting the name to change, and if you can't have the old name, let's get a new name, then I guess there's a little bit of sliver of hope. I'm not telling you it's going to happen. I'm just telling you that the team president squashed one part of it. He did not squash the other part of it, which means maybe there's a chance, right? Jim Carrey, I don't know the character's name, but maybe there's a chance. So some of you are going to be happy with the news. Some of you are not going to be happy with the news. I think moving forward, at least we have some finality to it. We have some resolution to that part of this conversation, and we can move forward with the next part of the conversation as it comes. But I still think the new stadium situation, where the Commanders are going to play in the future, all those things still much bigger fish to fry for Jason Wright, for Josh Harris, and then, of course, for Ron Rivera, looking at putting a winning product on the field. Speaking of doing that, coming up tomorrow, we're back out here at practice. We will also be talking to Director of Player Personnel, Eric Stokes. So come back for comments and observations from that. In the meantime, if you've got questions or comments, just throw them in the YouTube comments, on Twitter, or email me at lockedoncommanders@gmail.com. Send them directly via text to Subtext via joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders first listen of the day, every day, every day. Thank you for coming through on a consistent basis like you do and making me a part of your day, part of your football routine. Until we speak again, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team